Hey, I'm Dave. Welcome to Shop Talk. I'm joined by my co-host Glenn tonight. How are you, Glenn?
I'm doing well again, Dave.
Good to hear. I've got my brother James in the studio with us as well. He's just off camera. So, hello, James. How are you?
Hey, how's it going?
Now, we're trying something a little different with the audio because I got two people here. We're not wearing headphones. We'll see. Sounds good so far. We'll see how it turns out. So I thought I'd start with a bit of a random anecdote that's actually topical. We'll find out why in a moment. But when I was about 4 years old, my parents came to me one morning and they said, "Hey, we're going boating. Do you want to go?" I'm like, "Hell yeah." So when I got my little shorts on and my good sandals on, and I went and sat in the car, a car I still own today, by the way, a 69 Pontiac, and waited for my parents eagerly to come out. And nice summer morning on the weekend, and they drive for about 3 minutes, and they pull up to like a local school or a church or some big building, and they get out. And in my memory, they just left me in the car, which is a little weird because I was only 3 or 4 in this story that I'm remembering. But as I recall, that's how it went down. Anyways, they're in there maybe 5-10 minutes, and they come back out, and I go, "All right, let's go home." And then I'm like, "What do you mean? I thought we were going boating." And they're like, No, we're going voting." Now, I had a bit of a speech impediment. I don't know if I had a bit of a listening impediment too, but not a technology story. But since we just had the election here, I thought I'd bring it up.
And most of you folks in the U.S. are big fans of mail-in voting as well.
It varies by state, but here in Washington State, there's a lot of mail-in voting. Yeah.
Yeah. Not a lot of water skiing behind the boating, though. Just boat and get out, eh?
It's not that I'm super libertarian, but when they brought in the law that you had to pass a test to take your boat out, I sold my boat. My kids took the test and passed, but I was grandfathered in for a couple of years because I'd had a license or, with the non-test for a number of years. So, and then that expired eventually, and that happened to be when I sold my boat. But
I mean, when we were kids, we had a boat at the cabin. We were like 12.
yeah,
13, and we were out in the lake ripping around, and I don't know if there are any rules or not, but yeah, I'm pretty sure you're not getting away with that now. So
yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there are rules for. I guess I should have taken the test or studied for it, at least know the answers. So I don't know the answer to that one. But speaking of things I don't know the answer to, you got any good questions for me tonight?
well, I have questions. Some of them I'm certain are good. And I think folks will.
All right,
they'll pick and choose. But let's get fired off here. Again, we're going to go in sort of show order. We're starting off with the cool LED plate frame that you did a little piece on. That was quite interesting. Got some good feedback. First one here from Rick Harms. I guess I missed something. How's the ESP32 powered?
Right now off USB, but what I've got is a 12 volt to 5 volt buck converter. So it runs from the car's 12 volts into there, produces 5 volts, which goes into the M5 stack module, which has 3 volt and 5 volt regulators, or 3.3 volt. So it steps it again further down to 3.3 for all the internal use. And I've also got a 12 to 3.3 volt buck converter because what I've done is tied it into the license plate lamp so that the plate now dims automatically when you turn on the car headlights. So I had to sense when the lights were coming on. And I played around with a CAN bus solution for a little bit, and I got some traction on that, but that was going to be a while. So I just wound up doing a simpler version. And so far as I can tell on the bench, it works pretty well. We'll see. I also used the ESP Now protocol to build a remote control. So this little ESP module here, which is really tiny, you just hit the button on it, and off screen, you have to trust me that the plate changes, but all it does is it connects via a proprietary Wi-Fi network called ESP Now between the chips. You just give it the MAC address and a number of bytes and the count of bytes and say, send it, and it will do that. So the receiver gets the effect information and stuff from the remote, and it works really well. Saves me having to run a wire from the console to the license plate.
And I believe that little remote piece there, is that the one that you can actually get a little vinyl or rubber wrist supports? You can kind of wear it like a watch.
No, but that's the one I'm actually using at the plate is the M5 Stick C Plus.
Okay. Yeah. They're beautiful, tiny little displays on those things.
Yeah, they're very nice. I think they're OLED.
Ah, there you go. Yeah,
maybe TFT, but I think they're OLED.
Yeah. So the next one here, we got NLGB. Put them next to each other so you can still enjoy the flaming plate. I don't think he's thinking about a duplicate plate thing. Or is there a law against that? I'm going to answer that one and say I'm pretty sure you can't have two. But furthermore, he says, may I suggest exploring WLED? It is compatible with your SK6812s and makes the plate fully controllable with your phone.
WLED is great. It's especially a great short path to really simple effects. So if you wanted solid color fills or a marquee effect or whatever things it does, it's great for that. And there is a phone app that's pretty capable, so you could go in and change the color of your license plate frame and so on. I wanted more control. I wanted the flame effects. I wanted to be able to push effects to it by Wi-Fi. I don't know why, but I guess I could do that from my phone. And a number of other things that are really specific to the Night Driver software code base that supports a number of features that actually aren't super important for the license plate case, since it's such a simple case. But for anything more complicated, I generally use Night Driver.
Yeah. W. Clifton, Gameplays Tutorials. He's calling us from the Republic of Ireland. He's got a couple things in here, but he gets on. Is it legal to manufacture license plates from scratch in the U.S. using your vehicle's existing registration plate? I assume the plates are registered to the vehicle and owner in the U.S. So there's two questions there. Do you know about the manufacturer?
Yeah,
plate?
it varies probably by state. I know that up in Saskatchewan, license plates went with you, not the car. But in Washington State, the plate follows the vehicle, not the driver. So it varies. Well, that's a different country, but no, it is not legal to manufacture your own license plates. They have to be the state issued plate. And there are places that will manufacture plates, which I have actually ordered from to get classic plates, like a 1969 plate made up. And they're generally offshore and it arrives in a brown paper wrapper. So I assume I don't think I was breaking any law by getting a 50-year-old reproduction plate, but technically it may be. So.
Yeah, I don't know the law. I know in British Columbia here, I remember at least a dozen years ago, saw a beautiful brand new 911 at the time, and we need front and rear plates on that. And this guy had a sticker nicely conformed to the front bumper of his 911, and it was an exact replica. I don't know the legal status of it, but I thought that was an interesting solution for, not wanting to screw in a mounting plate to the front of your fancy new sports car, but not sure what the law is here. Nice.
I'm dealing with that with my 2010 Range Rover Supercharged Autobiography, whatever it's called. My daughter is borrowing it. It's a 2010, so it's like 15 years old at this point, and I've never run a front plate, even though it's required here. Never had a problem. And she's borrowing it, and they will boot your vehicle if you don't have a front plate. So I got to find some kind of temporary mount because I don't want to mount, with screws through the front fascia, which is how they do it. I got to find a suction cup mount or something cool. So if you know of a really cool plate mount that would look good on the front bumper of a older Range Rover, let me know in the comments.
Yeah, and not technology, but I just took my mom's car from Saskatchewan here where they don't need front plates, got it here, need a front plate, ordered the right plate, and actually went to the Honda dealership and got all the right mounting things. And for the hell, I just could not figure out how to mount the damn thing. And I finally decided the car's 10 years old. I just pulled out screws, screwed it right into the front. There, done. So went through all the effort and then abandoned my plan after 30 minutes of frustration. Roger Mason. And
wait, I got, you know how to mount a front plate to a Honda?
Oh, too late now.
Yeah, that's actually how they mount the plate bracket to the Tesla. So Nikki just got her car, and it's a Tesla, and it comes with a front plate because the law requires them to put the bracket on. And so she immediately wants it removed and to run the risk of no front plate. So I got offshore fishing line, like 100-pound test line, wrapped it around 2 bolts, and then made that into a saw and sawed through it. And that's all it is the VHB tape from 3M, which is, I shouldn't say that's all it is, because that stuff holds in like the windows on skyscrapers and stuff. So,
and VHB is very high bond?
Yes, I believe it is.
Yeah. I think you had suggested that to me too. And I'm like, no, I'll get the legit mounting bracket and the right screws and everything. And then I just screwed the bracket on. So
yeah, I thought of VHB, but then I realized, well, how would I ever take it off without ripping the paint off? But the exact same way, I could just saw through it later.
Yeah.
So.
Well, some residue, but
oh, it does, and then you got to clean that up with 3M adhesive remover and stuff.
Goo Gone or whatever else you got in your arsenal. Roger Mason says, Dave, what year model Pontiac is that? It's a very clean looking classic. Like me. Oh, like me? Probably like Roger, but probably like you and I as well. So, and you mentioned the Pontiac, so.
Yeah, this is the car I actually went voting in. And my dad bought it when I was a kid in 1969. And that became my car when I was 16, and I've had it ever since, which is a little over 50 years total now. It's a 1969 Pontiac 2+2 with a 427 4-speed. Although it wasn't born with that, this one was a more pedestrian model. So I've got a real one, a convertible 427 4-speed car. Actually, as far as I know, it's the only one that was made, and it's currently in restoration. And it's like nuclear fusion, man. It's always coming, but it's never quite ready.
6 more weeks. 6 more weeks.
Yeah.
Another question that's come up a couple times. What is that light behind you? The one on the far right that changes colors and loops back in itself. The tall one. Thanks. So.
Yeah, I keep getting questions about that lamp. It's probably out of scene right now. I don't know if we can get it in scene or not, but it is my spiral lamp, and it's a Home Depot lamp that I bought. It was just a normal white lamp. So I stripped all the guts out of it, then I pulled their LEDs out of it, saved the plastic covers, then installed my own. I'm using SK6812 LEDs now, and put the covers back, rewired it, ran the wires down through the metal framework, and then put my electronics in underneath the bottom, and it works pretty good. So I'm going to actually do an episode on it. I don't want to have to rebuild the entire thing because I only filmed some portions of it when I was doing the original one. And I'm not a fan of doing something twice if there's no reason. So I'm trying to figure out how to make such an episode compelling. So that's another, if you've got suggestions in the comments, what do you want to know about this lamp other than what I've told you in the last 30 seconds? Because that's a short episode. So
yeah. Yep. Okay, now we're going to move on to how one line of code led to the catastrophe. So Random Precision Software says, what language does it use? He's assuming it's either C or assembly. God help us if it was in slowed, arsed, Python, or Rust. LOL.
I assume we're talking about the Mars Polar Lander because I've got 2 episodes with almost the same title. How one line.
Yeah, no, it's the Mars, the lander one. Yep.
Yeah, and that code, as far as I know, was written in C and assembly language, and it was for the IBM. I forget the number. It's got like RAD 6000 or something like that. So it's like a radiation hardened version of their, I assume, the same as their RS 6000 chip, but it's running at a much slower clock speed, like 16 to 25 megahertz, but super resilient and great for that kind of embedded hardware thing. It'd be fun to play with one.
Is that another addition coming to Dave's museum?
Well, at least they're small. I don't know. They could be $50. They could be $5,000. I have no idea what those things are worth, but it'd be fun to get a dev kit for one.
Cool. Con Fat Man, leg sensor exception.
Oh, on the probe, it threw a leg sensor exception and the ground caught it.
Okay.
There you go. That's my joke for the night, but it's pretty obscure.
Kate Aoyama. So was it a line of code or a flaw in the testing process?
Well, it could have been a single line of code because there was a problem where they set a single flag and then only checked for it and cleared it at the end after the timer fired. So yeah, it could have been as little as one line of code, but it could have been more than one line of code contributed to it.
And a more robust testing process might have caught
Yeah, they tested things independently, but they didn't test them in production with the whole system deployed. They didn't simulate a landing and have the legs pop out and check the code and see that it worked. They didn't do that kind of testing.
Yeah, we're going to get a couple sort of specific questions on some of that. So Brian Tetro says, why wouldn't this piece of code be moved to after the descent engines are started?
Yeah, you'd think that was... when you say move the code, I assume he kind of means in the state machine, move that case to be so that it doesn't turn off the engines until after they have been commanded to fire. And that sounds totally logical to me, and I don't know why that is.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And then Wild Rapier, why I wonder why there wasn't an altimeter to confirm the distance to contact or, in this case, obliteration.
Yeah, unless the thrust from the rocket, the descent rocket, makes it hard to read from a radar sensor or something like that, but radio waves should bounce and come back. So you would imagine there'd be a radar altimeter because the whole point of the system was to shut the engine off once the thing had actually touched down so the engine didn't just keep running in the dirt and throwing stuff up and debris. So as soon as the legs touch, it kills the engines. And because of the vibration, it thought that it had touched the legs and it killed the engines, but it was way too early. And they hadn't even fired yet, so that kill command was queued up and happened after the start. So as soon as they started, they basically ran for some brief period and then shut right down. And it does seem like a really weird and obvious bug, you know, in retrospect. But if you're not there and you weren't on the team and you weren't writing the code and you weren't in their test procedures, they did have code reviews, but how thorough were they? Who did the code reviews? That kind of thing. I don't know the answer there either. But
And anticipating or even considering sort of that vibration as this thing's coming down and how that affects the program, it's just, it's not an insignificant miss. The next three are kind of sort of related. So no such thing is, he says it was mixed units, right? And I don't think that's this case, but that gets to the next.
No, that's a different
question.
one that I made an episode on, the climate orbiter. Yeah,
so there's two folks here, Kevin McCarthy and John Burgess. They'll said there's another situation where a math person at NASA had to rewrite their code for the Apollo lander. Not sure of the situation. They need to have her rewrite the code. And then another, John Burgess says, I seem to recall another Mars lander crashed because of a mix-up between metric and imperial. Was that before or after this incident? So are you aware of one other
that
incident?
was the Ariane 5 rocket that they had some, and that could have been like 16-bit floating point to 32-bit. It was some kind of interchange between components that were made by different corporations, because Ariane had a whole bunch of different countries and corporations contribute. And so they all had to communicate. And at some point, they disagreed on something like whether it was metric or imperial. But I haven't done the episodes on those ones yet, so I don't know the details.
Yep. And then I've got another question here too. Kat and Vol said, sound like the software had more than one issue. Why would you allow your program to shut down the engines before they'd even been turned on? So a couple folks caught that little piece too.
Yeah.
NP T. What if a single line of code could blue screen millions of computers? CrowdStrike, hold my beer. Looking aside, I wonder if anyone on that software team had thought of the scenario where you might get multiple signals. Personally, I'd want to test it to make sure I know what it's doing and what I expect it and require it to do. So I think that's, again, one of the pieces that got missed was just that whole sort of vibration and the impact of that in terms of the way the code was written, eh?
Yeah, I've thought about that. And my guess, and this is just a total guess by trying to, I've written a lot of bugs of my own and I know how to fix them.
Intentionally or unintentionally?
Unintentionally, usually.
Okay.
I got a feeling that they thought that if they just set the flag multiple times, it's the same as saying there has been vibration. And then at the end of the timer, they were going to clear that no matter how many times it was set. So everything I read said they had this bad assumption that there would only be one event. And I don't know, is that the case, or was it like any number of events was the same as one event? Because that's okay. But their problem was when they reset the timer, it was too early, and then they got events after the timer expired, and so they considered those to be touchdown.
Or was there some additional condition or criteria that could have been met to help confirm that you were actually touchdown and not some other unrelated?
Yeah, you would think that their state machine would have checks for things like, yes, we have fired the engines. Yes, we have deployed the parachutes. Yes, we're at the right stage of the landing, things like that. But
yeah, for that critical
I hate to second guess things I wasn't involved in, because I hate people Monday morning quarterbacking without the details. So
yeah. Jared Lamberth, love your work on these, Dave. Could I humbly suggest a video giving your take on the Patriot missile clock bug? Maybe that one's been done too much. I don't know. At any rate, great work. Thanks for the wonderful content. So you got any interest in that Patriot missile clock bug?
Yeah, because there's a similar bug in Windows 95, which is there's a monotonic counter that just counts up from 0 when the machine starts. And they use that to keep track of elapsed time. And at some point, it overflows. And with Windows 95, it was like 28 days. I'm making up a number, so you'll have to Google it. But it had an issue where it would roll over, reset, and anything that was doing deltas, last time, current time, subtract, it's going to blow up or at least get the wrong answer. And I believe the Patriot missile had something like that, where if it had been on, and it was a much shorter time, like 28 hours or something, that the internal clock would overflow, and that screwed it up. And that led to the failure of an intercept of the Scud missile that killed a number of American servicemen in Iraq, or overseas. It wasn't in Iraq, I guess.
And not to make a joke of that, but 28 hours, isn't that that's the amount of time then you have to cut your arm off?
That's true.
Else?
Too soon.
Yeah, too soon. Yeah. Sometimes I just can't help myself, and apparently that's one of them. Rob Schofield, how about that priority inversion problem on NASA's Pathfinder?
Yeah, that's another one that I've heard of, but don't know the technical details of. So I want to look into some of these to see if they can, fit into this series of how a chunk of code caused a major malfunction. So,
Yeah. And again, I think there's, some of the stuff you've done, some folks have gone, oh, this has been done before, and other people have done it. But there's a lot of folks that seem to have some really positive feedback that the way you present it is just a little bit, it's just, it's sort of a nice, concise, and the approach you take is resonates with a lot of folks. So,
I appreciate that. There's a guy, Kyle Hill, does videos that there's been some overlap. I think he did a Therac 25 episode, and I intentionally didn't watch it until after I'd made mine. And then I realized, well, we're making very different videos here. It's very dramatic and it's very watchable, and it's got millions of views because it's a great video. But I'm kind of trying to do more technical deep dives into how these things happen and explain it to people that want more detailed understanding of what actually happened behind the scenes.
Yeah, and a different perspective on some of those aspects, right? Martin Dooley, how about a slightly older embedded code deep dive? Be great to hear your take on the Boeing Chinook FADEC, FADEC software from the 1990s.
Yeah, big helicopter. Big helicopter. That's very descriptive.
Yeah, Chinook. Yeah. Even I can guess that much. Yeah.
CH-47. There you go. Yeah, that's another one, again, that I'm familiar with the incident, but again, I don't know the actual technical details. I remember that, and I thought that was like on a throttle control issue or something where the throttle disagreed and the computer commanded something else, but I won't make the story up. I'll look into it, and I'll put it in my stack of episodes.
It's nice that your viewers and subscribers and commenters are assigning you homework here. So
yeah, I appreciate it, actually. So please fire away in the comments with any video suggestions. So
yeah, and they're, again, suggestions are welcome. That's what we look for, and yep, that's some interesting stuff that I'd sure like to hear about as well. Big Daddy MRI rang the bell and found your RAID video. Since I'm going to install a NAS, and I thank you for your RAID video, now could you cover how to set up a NAS so that it will shun attempts to infiltrate and put malware into the NAS? I'd find that most interesting.
Yeah, that's a very specific topic. I could probably do an episode on setting up a NAS and then include that as a topic. And if I were to give you the brief answer, I would monitor CPU usage because, you've got to have all your security ducks in a row and firewalls and everything else to keep intruders out. But if they get in, 99% of the time these days, what they're going to do is encrypt all your data and then malware or ransomware you.
Right.
And so you'll have to pay in Bitcoin if you want your data on your NAS back unencrypted. But to do that, they have to encrypt your whole drive, which takes a massive amount of CPU power from your NAS. So if your CPU goes, 100% CPU bound for 30 minutes, you probably should look at your NAS because it's not going to do that under normal operation. So that's one of the tricks. Whether I can make a whole episode out of that, I don't know. It's a good one, though. I'll put it on the list.
Okay. I was going to ask the question, how do you monitor what your CPU is doing? Is there...
that varies by the operating system. So on the Synology, they have an activity monitor that you can, it's like a little task manager applet.
Gotcha. Yeah. R. Dyer. I noted in this video your mention of NASA software engineering laboratory standards, and he's got that in quotes. I'm curious if you follow any kind of published standards for program syntax, naming standards, structure, or if you just have practices you've developed over your career. And then he says, either way, is there an anthology of your methods that he could find somewhere, or should he just be looking closely examples of your stuff on GitHub?
I was just going to say, just look at GitHub. That's how the sausage is made.
But where does that come from, Dave?
Most of that coding style comes from a style known as the Cairo coding style, because when I started at Microsoft, I started on Windows NT, which was the operating system, and Cairo was going to be the next huge version of it.
Tukwila.
Yeah, Tukwila came along because Cairo was too far away. Tukwila being like 30 miles from here, as opposed to Cairo, which is more than 30 miles.
Sorry,
No, that's good to point it out.
So the coding methodology, the practice was Cairo was that. So that was the sort of name that they used internally at Microsoft for that style of documenting then.
Yeah, exactly. And because I had just started, I kind of needed to adopt whatever coding style and conventions were on the local team. And so I imprinted on a guy named Kurt DeBeek. And he was the software test engineer that was working on the same things I was working on. I was the developer, and then he would write unit tests and probe my APIs and things like that. And so he was pretty smart guy and very senior, or not very senior, very smart and kind of senior. How's that? And so I imprinted on him and kind of learned his coding style, followed that. And what I use today is still kind of a variation of that, although I do a lot more modern C++. In those days, it was all COM-OLE. And so you've got a lot of H result equals co-create interface and all these kind of standard boilerplate that you get used to in COM, whereas the standard boilerplate of a modern C++ app might be vector, the kind of common things you see.
Yeah. And how did that Cairo style that you were sort of learning from, and again, you were brand new, so everybody was senior to you in some regard.
Right.
How did that vary from what you had learned coming out of university?
Well, they didn't teach coding style in university. I did my senior project on coding styles to reduce bugs was the basic idea. I forget the name, the fancy title. But, they don't really teach you much for coding style, especially on larger projects. So I just had my own kind of homegrown style that worked for me as long as the code wasn't too old and it hadn't been too long since I wrote it, because I was pretty young and raw. So
yeah. And then again, that you're coming out, like you said, you imprinted on that, and then it just kind of sticks then, and you just keep.
Yeah, I don't want to say stuck in my ways, but if something works, I evolve it, but I don't just randomly change it. So
yeah. Jeffrey Bassett, you reference a video on debouncing. Could you highlight that? Even spend some time to slowly help us understand more about how you think this through as you write the debounce routine?
Yeah, I can try to explain on the spot how debouncing works. I've got a whole video on it on the channel. So if you just go to Dave's Garage and search for debounce, you'll get a much more thorough examination of it with code and so on. But basically, what you want to detect is when a switch closes and really quickly reopens, closes, reopens, closes, reopens, closes. You want to know the last time it's done moving. And if you know that your switch, when it's bouncing, bounces, every 3 milliseconds or something like that, that's the natural frequency of it, then what you would do is when the switch closes or opens, you start to do two things. You have an interrupt function that starts a timer. And when that timer expires, you look to see, is the state the same as what it was when I started the timer? And if it has, then that means that 50 milliseconds have gone by, or whatever you set your timer to. So I know the switch has settled down and is done bouncing. Whereas if it's been less, 4 milliseconds or 5 milliseconds, you figure, no, the switch is still transiting. So.
Okay. And that, I think, was covered partly in some of those LED applications and stuff that you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. That's where I first remember hearing that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, because on the ESP32 modules, you'll just have a raw button attached to a switch. And if you just cycle on every change and it bounces, you might change the effect 7 times every time you hit the button. So.
Yeah. Lucid Moses says, new writing style. Did you hire a writer? Take chunks from a chat GPT outline, or just the different kind of topic led to the different style?
I think this isn't a non-computer, but there's kind of a story behind the polar lander. And when I write in story mode like that, I write more like my book story or my book style and less like my show style. So it probably does sound a little different.
It's a
narrative. It may even seem a little weird.
It's a bit of a narrative kind of. You're telling a story rather than sort of explaining.
Yeah, and it's probably a little fancier than the real technical episodes.
Ooh, fancy, Dave. Yeah.
I throw in the odd flourish.
Ooh, flourish. Yeah. And again, coming from Canada and the bilingual, they're searching the je ne sais quoi. Yeah, that's all I know.
Speaking of flourishes, we were talking today with my brother, and one of the favorite moments from the old news is the Trudeau doing the pirouette behind the Queen. I think we've talked about that recently too. And
yep, classic. Yeah,
there's a flourish.
That's a flourish. Yeah, especially from a head of state. Now we're getting on to the formatting the ancient hard drive in your PDP-11. Machismo. Yeah. Machismo. Shag carpet in a workshop in Soviet Russia.
True.
Static electricity light shops. So you getting any power from that?
Yeah, the biggest challenge I have with static electricity in the shop here is actually I have these Herman Miller chairs, and they have like a fabric webbing that you sit on. And as I slide off, and because it's dry here to begin with in the wintertime, relatively, And because it's heated without any source of moisture, the air in here is dry to begin with. And because I've got cars stored in here, I also run a dehumidifier in the winter. So it's, 15, 20% humidity at best. So it's really dry out here. And if you slide off this chair and touch anything metal grounded, you're just going to get a hell of a zap. And the first time it happened to me with electronics, I was working on the Kim 1, and I walked over and I just grabbed the chassis, and I got a heck of a shock, and the thing rebooted. Now, it was resilient enough that I didn't blow anything up, but it made me very cautious about static. So in these months, if I'm ever working on anything electronic, I always go and touch ground first. Because, the carpet's actually not the issue. It's more just the dryness in the chair I'm sitting in, I think.
Yeah, that does explain all the balloons that are stuck to the ceiling, too. I thought it was helium, but I guess it's static charge, eh? Yeah.
And that explains why in some episodes my hair's standing up on the end there.
Dave Churchill, is it just me or were there actually 8 total screws?
Yes, there are 8 screws that hold that plate on. But the 9th one was the one that tripped me up.
That's right. Sean Lynn. Hi, Dave. Thank you for another informative, interesting video. I'm curious, what systems did you study in college for your operating system class and computer organization class? Did you study PDP-11 or program on PDP-11 in college?
I did. In fact, not for our operating systems class so much. That was mostly C, and then we did it under, oh my goodness, I think we did it under VMS, most of our operating system work, but not worth the operating system. It was like creating things that were like the operating system. So we wrote a C interpreter for, one project, that kind of thing. But the PDP-11 stuff was the hardware side of things, because I took it and I took the hardware track as well. And so we had the LSI PDPs, which are probably PDP-1123s or maybe even 03s, but they were the small, really basic 64K of memory in best case, console with a terminal attached to it. So we had one to each student basically, which was nice, or at least during the lab sessions we did anyway. And everything was done on the PDP-11 for that class. And I think the final project, I wrote a game very similar to Omega Race, if you remember that game in the arcade. And so it's got the little box in the center, and then the ships drift around the outside. And I did it using VT220 character code, so that all it had to do is, every frame update 4 or 5 things.
Right.
And at 9600 baud, it was actually, I'm not saying it was a good game, but it was
playable.
Yeah, at 2400 baud, not so much, because that's what we were dialed in at. But if you were on campus, it was much better.
Yeah. Wow. So that's where the PDP-11 then sort of is just that first.
Yeah, and when I was a much younger kid, when I was like 12, my mom got my brother and I into a science program that was like weekends at the University of Regina. And I think you did like paleontology or dinosaurs or something. Astronomy, okay.
Ooh.
And I did the computers one. And it was on the PDP, so you got to log in and everything else. And to me, it was just a massive, wall of computers, because I was half the size and they're pretty big to begin with. So,
and again,
I was always impressed by the PDPs. And then I knew a guy in high school that had one in his den or his dining room. He and a bunch of other guys. They look a lot like the band CCR. If you
those are the guys down the street from Miller, eh? Yeah. And again, at that age, it just imprints on you. Yeah, what was the guy's name? Roe? Roe was one of the guys.
Yeah, Roe, Gary, and Roy.
Yeah. Also known as CCR.
2 of them were brothers. And then, Gary and Roy were brothers. And Roe was, I don't know if he was related at all, but that's all I remember.
RGV -1. Wow, I didn't know they made PDPs that small. I wonder why it's got all that heavy metal plating. Is that RF shielding?
Yeah, it could be structural. The machine is really well built. It's immensely heavy too. It's crazy. Power supply is a good chunk of that, which runs down like a solid quarter of the machine. Don't know why they're so robust, but shielding could be a lot of it. There is a lot of electronics in it compared to a PC. It's pretty dense if you got a fully loaded one like this one is. So
now I know in some of the discussion we've had in the last week or so, you said you've got a new frame or case coming for. Is that case for that PDP you built from your tickle trunk of spare parts?
Yeah, I figured I could take all those parts, put them in that case, and it's got a power supply and everything else, and it should load up and make a fully operational, bootable PDP-11 out of parts.
And now you
With
got
a
a
case.
frame. Now you got a case to put it in, so it'll be complete.
I need a small rack, actually, like a 19-inch rack to mount some of these machines in, because I'd like to find a real deck data system rack similar to the one the 34 is in now with the blue panel. I'd love to find another one of those and load it out. Not likely to happen, so maybe just an industrial 19-inch equipment rack will have to work.
But if someone's got a line on one, send you
Yeah,
send
call
you a
me.
note. That'd be cool.
Email me.
Yep. Has the one you got shown up yet, or still?
No,
under-
it's shipped, but it's not here yet. So
Cool. Excuse me, Gower, 1973. Who thought it was a good idea to name every command a random jumble of letters and not something logical like what the command does?
oh, he's talking about the deck diagnostics, maybe like the zrkifo0.bin. There is a method to their madness, and I don't know how to decode it myself, but Z would tell you properly what kind of component it's for, like storage, and the R probably corresponds to some other. So you can sort of parse it if you know what you're doing. And since there's hundreds of them, they do need a system, because if you called one, and there's often multiple revisions of the same one, so you don't want to call it hard disk test number 1, hard disk test number 2, especially when you only got 8 letters. Or how many is it? 6 in RT11? I'm not sure. 7, I think. Dungeon, if you take the N off dungeon, what's that? That's 6.
Yeah. And again, that stuff would have had lots of meaning to the folks that were initially doing that, and it carried on, and then it's been sort of, I guess, forgotten a bit in the meantime. Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is it's a reality of short file names.
Yeah. You got to be pretty brutal with some of your abbreviation.
Yeah.
And substitution, right? Because common letters, you're going to run out of it, so you're going to pull a different one to fill in for the one that's been used too much. And all of a sudden it doesn't make sense when you're not in it fast and furious. Magic Man 123ification. Would the OS run slower if it's on the physical drive and not on the virtual one? And if it was on the real drive, would it only affect booting up? And how would you see the term on your Mac if it was?
As far as I know, because I see in the debugger, or not the debugger, but in the console output of the Cubone, when I'm emulating a drive, it actually spins it up from 0 RPM, and you can see it slowly rotate up to 2400 RPM. I think it is the final target speed. And so it simulates the drive running at slower speeds earlier in the process. So I think it's a pretty faithful reproduction of the physical process. So I'm going to say it's the exact same speed as the real drive. Unless Seeks are maybe faster, but I would imagine they probably add a delay for Seeks too. So, because to be compatible, there's probably code out there that assumes that, hey, if I'm going to seek the head on the hard drive, that's going to take more than 0 time, so I can do 5 instructions. And now all of a sudden it happens instantly, and then it can't. So, wouldn't be compatible.
Yep. Hybrid robotics. Cool stuff, Dave. I remember working on dual PDP-1170 systems for my first real programming. It was at RTS E and Basic Plus all the way. Do you have anything that can run RSTS E?
I do. I believe the 1173 and 83 will run it nicely. Okay. I've never tried it out, though.
Yep.
I should.
Well, tonight, after we finish doing this, you'll...
No, hold on, everybody. I'm going
to... wait here. Grotty boots. Quick quiz. And this might have been more of a general question, but I'm going to fire it at you. Who recalls the debug command? Who recalls the debug command to start the MFM low-level format on a PC? I guessed wrong, but was close. Must be getting old.
Go equals C800:5.
There you go. That's the one. Yep. I don't know how many people got that in the comments, but I just pulled the questions out. Modus ponens.
Before we actually do this question, I should say that is for the card that I just used not that long ago to format a drive. It depends where that card is mapped into memory. So it really, but C8 seemed to be a pretty common address because somebody suggested that online. So I tried it on a whim and it was actually the right address. So.
Yeah. And I think and someone else in the comments said that again, for me, it was like, oh yeah, loads star.star, 8, 1. Just sort of flashback to, being 12 years old again, sitting in the basement with the Commodore 64. Modus ponens. I would love it if you could find an RL01 or RL02 and get that working and show everyone.
I would too. I looked on eBay.
There's that RL01.
Yeah, that's like a 5 meg big disk pack drive,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
which would go great if I had a separate DEC data system cabinet to mount that extra big drive in. Unfortunately, the drive I saw online was for $3,500, unknown, not working. That's pretty rich for me. So
Yeah. Yeah. A little bit too much risk at that level. Yeah. Sokasak, why would you do this? I hear in the Old West they would do surgery without any anesthesia. Sorry. I hear in the Old West they would do surgery without any anesthesia except a bottle of whiskey. But that doesn't mean I want to go back and do that again. The PDP-11 is ancient. There's no use in having it. Just like the old S100 machines. I cannot perform any function worth its weight. It look cool. I guess I just don't get it. So...
yeah, but I guess it's like anything, right? It's like cars. Why do I have a 50-year-old car in basically factory condition, and why am I building a second one? And why do I have an RT909 reel-to-reel deck from 1984 when audio from the MP3 player is going to be superior? And I was thinking about this.
Yeah. Oh, I know the answer.
Yeah.
Well, because we were talking about
Yeah, we
this
talked
the
about
other
this a
day
while
again.
back.
Yeah, which I think is, yeah. You better tell them.
Yeah. So, my theory is that I now have the means to buy some nice stuff, but I'm not the kind of guy who has to run out and buy the best of everything that's current. I mean, I do have good Apple stuff, but I'm a shareholder, so I kind of like to know what's going on. But other than that, I'm not a big adopter of super expensive tech. I don't have to have really expensive current AV systems and things like that. But I do like the very best of whatever was cool at the time I thought it was cool. And so I've got PDP-11s because when I was a kid, I thought they were awesome and I really wanted one, and there was no hope of having one then. But now I can have one, and it gives me almost as much joy as having it back then probably would have. Same with the audio equipment. It's not equipment I could have even appreciated or made use of in 1984, but now having access to it is awesome. And so I don't need a current really expensive stereo. I'm happy with my expensive for the time old stereo. And for any of this nostalgic stuff, I think that seems to be the thing. I'm kind of reliving the original experience, but making it better by getting better equipment than I could have had at the time, even if I could go back in time. So
it's funny. I mean, this is like the third or fourth time now just in this episode, that whole thing about imprinting. And you mentioned like that seems to be the sort of what keeps it. That's, you're young, you get this thing, you see it, and it just sort of sticks in your head and plants. And I mean, when we talked about that too, there's a car that was super cool when we were 16 or 17 or 18, or the first or second car. And man, what I would give to just have one of those brand new or like new. It's not a great car now. Wasn't necessarily a great car then, but it's just,
right.
It's that nostalgia, that imprinting, it just locks in your brain. And so for you now to have the means to sort of get some of those things just sort of scratches that itch and just satisfies that little piece that is way more satisfying than having the best of the best turntable that's out right now in 2024. Hey,
right.
I'd like a reel-to-reel machine from 1982. That's what I really want.
Yeah, I wonder if it's something to do as well with the amount of import you attach to it at the time and whether that fades. Because as a person with autism, I think of I think in a very monotropic way, which is I think of one thing at a time. I think about it a lot, and then I move on. But while I'm thinking about it, it's really important. So if I'm obsessed with cars or big block engines or computers or whatever I'm working on, I think I put such a high value on it that doesn't fade over time. So here I am 30 years later, and I've still got a big block Chevy in the corner of my garage because you should.
Yeah. And there's lots of folks who have that kind of nostalgic view and are doing that stuff, but it's neat to do it with the old technology and stuff.
But I know people that, like my father-in-law before he passed, absolutely the least nostalgic guy in the world. If it was older than 6 months old, throw it away, get a new one.
Yeah. Well, and some people a lot of folks like cars and that stuff. But I mean, if it's 2-3 years old, they're flipping it and getting another one and renewing their lease or buying or trading it in. They just got to have the latest, greatest, most recent technology. And yeah, you're still rolling around in a 15-year-old Range Rover, and yep, works fine.
Yeah, that's the way my grandfather was. He was a really early adopter of like all cool things like label makers to weird electronics. This is like 1972 era I'm talking about. Calculators. He bought me a calculator when I was a baby. He bought a tape deck, or not tape deck, tape recorder in like when I was born in 68, which would have been a big deal. And bought one for himself, one for me that we had growing up. So he had all this really cool technology. I don't know if he was nostalgic at all, but he was a real craver of the latest and greatest things. So,
And
and
that's
he got a
the one
new
that started-
car every 2 years. You know, he didn't drive an old car at all. And
Is that your grandpa that started the hardware store then?
yeah.
Oh yeah. Wow. Cool. JT KZ7KQ. Not sure how I can pronounce it any other way. Could you provide some details regarding the hardware setup for that PDP-11? What floppy drives controller are used? What controllers used for the hard disk? Did you build this from parts, or did you acquire it as is? As this case isn't listed for a PDP-1183 computer as far as I can see.
Yeah, as far as I know, this was donated by a viewer, and I can't remember his name off the spot. I'd have to look it up, but he's from Australia. If it's you, thank you very much for having sent it in. It's a micro PDP 1173, and I have done some upgrades to it. I added some stuff. So it came as a fully complete system with a hard drive, a little bit of memory, hard drive controller, serial ports, 8 ports, and the basics like that. So I've got the drive working. I added a bunch of 3 more memory boards, so it's got 2 megabytes of memory. And so I've kind of maxed the machine out, but it started life as a fully operational system. So it went from an L1173 to an 1183 because I upgraded the CPU board to one I had on hand that turned out to be better and faster than the one that came with the machine. So I just upgraded it. So yeah, that's basically the hardware stack. The hardware controller, the drive controller is an RQDX3, which splits out to a big bus bulkhead connector that splits out to both floppies and hard drives. And so it's got a dual floppy that is connected to it. And it's also got 2 cables for 2 drives and a big warning, never install 2 drives. Probably the power supply can't handle it.
Not without some magic smoke. Jeremy Martin, do you have a video on how to get that cool retro terminal set up? I think it's really cool. You're using old hardware, new hardware in tandem like this. If I had infinite time and money, I would love to do some projects with vintage computers. So.
Yeah, it's really simple. You just go to Google cool retro term and download it. There's no setup or anything. Now that'll just give you a terminal on your local machine that looks cool and retro and looks like an old phosphor monitor. You then need a terminal program if you're going to connect to something. And I use Minicom. That's available on Mac and Linux, and I use it on WSL under Windows, but you have to pass support through, so it's complicated. I don't know of a great solution on Windows. I'm sure there are many, but the cool retro term itself is specific to the Mac as well. And yeah, I wish somebody would do a cool PC version of it. I'd be customer number 2.
Number 2, yeah.
Nah, somebody wants it more than me, but
yeah, okay. I'm subscriber number 3, so yeah. Chris Simpson, would it be possible for Dave to interview Tim Patterson, the person who Microsoft purchased QDOS from?
Yeah, I could reach out, and I think he's still local. He was local here at one point, obviously. So
yeah.
I think that would make an interesting interview. Something to look into.
Go. Excellent. 01AI01, 1AI1. Wait a minute. So Dave uses a Mac? He wrote parts of Windows. Why switch to a Mac?
Because when I made my very first episode of Dave's Garage, which I think was Help My Shop's on Fire with LEDs.
Was that when you were wearing the you had an apron, I think.
Apron on, yeah.
That's a beauty.
I needed to edit the video. And then nothing fancy, like cut the beginning and chop the end, that kind of thing. And I got out the PC and I loaded it up and I tried to get Movie Maker. And they don't give you Movie Maker anymore. I went to download Movie Maker. No, you can't even download Movie Maker anymore. And this is before Clipchamp. So at that time, your only real solution was to get a third-party app like Pinnacle Studio, which I had a license for, but it was like 2 versions old and it crashed all the time on my current version of Windows. And I was just really frustrated with the experience. And I realized, well, I've got a MacBook that I actually run Windows on because I like the MacBook hardware. And I would just wipe the Mac stuff off or dual boot it with Boot Camp and run Windows on it. So what I wound up doing was just booting it back into the Mac mode, and it has a iMovie. So I played with that for about 10 minutes, and I realized if I'm going to learn something, I'm going to actually learn something a little more powerful. So I downloaded Final Cut from the App Store. Since then, I've been using Final Cut to do all my video editing. And because of that, I do most of the creative stuff on the Mac and a fair bit of programming stuff on the PC, but it's very utilitarian on the PC, and the creative side is now on the Mac. But that's just a function of where I do the video editing.
So I forgot that. Yeah, you were using Mac hardware with that MacBook, but running Windows on it.
Yeah, in fact,
And the Mac stuff in your house, your kids were all running Macs. Is that, or were they on
they
PCs?
were, but they were all boot camped into Windows as well.
Oh, okay.
So I had a deal with them. I said, I will run it as a Mac or a PC. And if you run it as a Mac, well, in either case, if you run it as a Mac, it's more the default anyway. Or if you run it as a PC, you don't get to be administrator. Only I get to be administrator. So they didn't take that deal. And of course, they would run Minecraft and I need to install this plugin. And oh my God, it's got malware in it. Who knew? And then they need to print, at 3 a.m. the night before their paper is due. And it's, Dad. I'm like, no, I'm not. Well, honestly, I probably did fix it each time. But I was extra frustrated because I had sworn that if you screwed up the machine, I wasn't going to fix it if you had to be the administrator. So, but the Mac made that a little easier. And now they do run Macs mostly. Steven, I think, still runs PC stuff. And Andrew plays games on the PC. But
yeah, he just built one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. From the tickle trunk again.
Pretty much.
Will he ever learn? I think
I'm just in this for the awesome usernames, by the way.
Well, will he ever learn, man? I'll answer, or I'll ask you any question he asks, I think. Love it. Remember interleaving?
Yeah. In fact, when you go to C800:5, the first thing you have to do is load the RAX register with the ID of the drive in the high nibble and the interleave of the sectors in the low nibble, which I know sounds like nonsense, but it really is nonsense. And then you jump to that C800:5 address and it will format your drive with that interleave. And what interleave actually is on old hard drives, as you can imagine, there were sectors that went around the disk. So a track was broken up into, let's say, 21 sectors going around. Now, can the drive read sector 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or does it need a breather after each sector? If it needs a little breather, then it's going to write and read sector 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 in that order, come around and then do the even ones. But that means that every time it has to read the whole track, the disk has to go around twice. Now, on my ST251 under MS-DOS, it suggested an interleave of 3, which means every third sector. So it's going to take 3 full rotations to read a track, which slows things down quite a bit. So when MFM and ROL drives started getting a lot faster, eventually you could get controllers that could do one-to-one interleave on the disk, which just meant, it would read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, come around, next track, next track, next track, a lot faster.
Okay. So, and I don't know, you said what, high nibble and low nibble?
Oh, I'm sorry. In a byte, the top 4 bits are called a nibble, and the bottom 4 bits are called a nibble.
Okay. When you said that, I started to think back, and I think it's Commodore 64. Was it peaks and pokes? Is that what?
Yeah, peek was for looking at memory. You'd peek at memory, and then poke was to poke a value into it.
Yeah, put some. Yeah, vaguely recall that stuff. Just sort of tweaked for me for some weird reason. Bread SJ or Breads J. Have you programmed in Fortran? I have a hard bug.
No, I never have. Maybe did we ever do that in high school when we had to do all the Waterloo languages?
You know what? I was going to say Fortran is one of the Fortran and Pascal and BASIC. But I don't know how much we must have had to do something in.
I think there was like one assignment in Fortran to get a taste for it.
Yeah.
And that's probably the only Fortran I've ever written.
Okay. Yeah. And I think I remember the manual for it for some reason, but yeah.
I've got the manual in the house.
I've seen that there too. Yeah. So Bread's looking for help in Fortran. You're not that guy.
I got the book, but I'd have to look it up.
Yeah. Charles, QW4HV. Dave! Can't get to the bottom of this tech question online. He's got a laptop with USB Thunderbolt ports, no Ethernet, and for gaming he needs to use a USB to Ethernet dongle. Will a POW quality dongle compared to a top quality one affect ping and general connection quality?
What's POW? A piece of wank?
Will a POW quality dongle compared to a top quality?
I don't know what POW means. I don't know
POW
what the
must mean
acronym
something
means.
to Charles. It must be. So will a crap quality dongle compared to a top quality dongle one affect the ping and general connectivity quality?
I would guess not. I'm going to guess that we are dealing in microseconds at that point and not milliseconds, so it's not going to adversely impact ping times. If you want a really fast adapter, he said Thunderbolt, and if they are Thunderbolt, like I've got a 10 gigabit Thunderbolt adapter. I used it on my Mac laptop in my media room.
Right.
And they're super fast. So if you really do have Thunderbolt, that's the way to go.
And what would that run? What's the cost on that bad boy in the US?
I bought mine like 5 years ago when they were,
Okay.
$300. They were expensive, but
Yeah.
they probably come down quite a bit.
Okay. Oh, there's that sound we'd like to hear. Lars H. Hoog. It was kind of irritating that the NT4 Service Pack 3 was only available with 56-bit encryption, because here in Sweden, it was annoying that Service Pack 4 or NT4 Service Pack 3 was only available with 56-bit encryption in Sweden, when 128 was included in the USA.
That's how we were able to steal all of IKEA's secrets.
Some assembly required, yeah.
Yeah.
It's retribution. That's what it was, eh?
Yeah, it's payback for 56 bits. Yeah, I assume at the time they could probably easily break 56 bits, or they wouldn't have said it was okay to export 56-bit encryption. But yeah, it was a weird time.
And that was your fault or some other Dave?
That'd be a different Dave.
Okay. Samuel Magalocusts. Hi, Dave. Love the show. Do you have any advice as to which programming languages I should learn? So far, they've learned Python, C, C++, and JavaScript. And what's TS?
TypeScript, probably.
TypeScript. I was thinking of learning Zig next. What do you think?
I think that's a great set of languages. I don't think at this point I would expand my language set. I would dive deeper, maybe add assembly to that portfolio for your debugging ability on lower level systems. I would really dive into C++ and Python and try to get some level of mastery in both of those. That's where I spend my time.
You've been doing a bit of Python stuff, have you?
Yeah, I like Python actually, but every time I write a piece of Python and then I go look for a piece of Python that somebody's written, they do it in like one line, and I've got like this whole flow going on. It's like Python can be really compact and dense if you're good at managing arrays and lists and types.
And you also said you tweaked your PrimeCiv software too recently.
Oh yeah, ask me about that in a second. I'll tell you about the Python I worked on today, since I almost never do. What I did is we were on a call, and I was talking to our friend Rob. And he was asking me about my driveway sensor, which is a project I did some months ago, which senses with an optical beam cars coming into the driveway, and then it transmits over Wi-Fi and
intruder alert.
Yeah, it plays a little berserk sample and plays intruder alert. And it's not working right now, so I got to figure out why it's a communications issue. And he was bugging me. He's like, "Well, why don't you take a Raspberry Pi and set it up with a camera, and then install AI and a TPM, and then you can have the AI monitor and look for cars and send you a message when it sees a car."
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah. But that seemed kind of interesting. So I started tinkering on that today, or yesterday actually. And what I found is that I can actually get a video stream from the existing surveillance system. There's a protocol error that's RSTP or something, real-time streaming protocol, RTSP.
RTSP, yeah.
And so my cameras all support that. So I can pull images from all the cameras, and then I run it with OpenCV and a package called YOLO, which stands for You Only Look Once, OpenCV being Open Computer Vision. The combination of those two packages, which are Python packages, allow you to write Python scripts. So about 30 times a second, I pull an image from the camera. I have the GPU do the object detection. It locates all the cars. And my Python code keeps track of cars, so I know how one car has left and another one has arrived. So I can broadcast the car has left, car has arrived. And I got that much working so far.
So you're going to move from a model which actually had a sensor at the start of the driveway to one that just works for purely video.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, it won't work as well at night in the dark and for cars at the far end of the driveway, but there's a camera out there for recording security purposes. I just can't get a stream off of that when it goes to a different DVR. So
yeah. So nighttime, I mean, the lights on the car will help a bit.
Yeah, I'm not trying to do plate recognition or anything.
Right. No. But in terms of, I mean, a car leaving or going, the lights, I think would help that, I guess. And then, when I show up late at night, I can just shut my lights off, and then you won't get a intruder alert or something. Yeah,
maybe, but maybe it can still see you well enough. I don't know about the lights either. Like when the AI is trained, do they train it on two headlights? What if two motorcycles are riding side by side? Is that a car? I don't know.
Can you train it on that?
I'm not up to training AIs.
Okay.
But,
yeah. That's a whole different thing. Okay, Necronom. It's a shame you went through the pain of fixing the Tour de Force game, but it was never released. It'd be a shame if it becomes lost forever. Excuse me, I don't think the people at the now non-existent company would mind if you released the code for game preservation purposes at games that weren't. Or maybe you could contact someone to check. I think you answered this sort of directly in the comments, but it'd be nice if you could sort of give.
Yeah, it'd be better if I got the same answer both times, but I'll make up something.
Well, you'll get feedback if you give a different answer, but
there you
go ahead.
The basic reason being that I don't know who owns the rights, and I'm pretty sure it's not any single company or entity because it was a partnership between Acme Animation in Canada and Gremlin Graphics in Europe. And then there were other companies that were involved in distribution. And so by releasing it, you might violate all of those people's rights. So you need everybody's permission. And I would not know how to begin to track down representatives that are going to be in the position to sign off on a 30-year-old matter from a company they no longer work for. I don't know how to find them. So and again, I don't know if I'm just wired that way, but because I said I would never do that, I'm never going to do that. Maybe until I'm like on my deathbed or something. It's not that interesting either. I don't want to create a bunch of mystery around the forbidden secret code, but
the greatest game ever, right? This will be that and E.T.
Yeah, buried in a landfill.
Sorry. Not fair. New York Babs. Hey, Dave. I don't know much about autism and folks having kids. Maybe too personal. But if you don't mind sharing, are any of your children autistic?
No, I think to each to their own degree in varying amounts has a number of characteristics they've inherited from me. And since I'm on the spectrum, they have inherited characteristics that put them to some degree on the spectrum as well. But for none of my kids, it doesn't rise to the level of a disorder, so they don't have ASD.
Yeah, that's the D is the important part we talked about that before. Yeah, that's what distinguishes. Michael Angelotti. Dave, I can't help but tear up every time I see the Friendly Giant ending, and I'm really starting to enjoy these episodes. Well done, sir. Do you remember why you had latex gloves on?
I do, actually. I was watching a guy's video, and I even remember what channel it was, but I'm not going to say. And he was doing some like close-up electronics work, and his fingernails and cuticles were just gross. Like his fingernails were way too long, and they were dirty underneath, and then his nail beds were all chewed up. And well, my nails are nice, honest, but I didn't want anybody to have to look at my nails and be grossed out by them. So I usually wear those latex gloves in the shop when I'm working on anything dirty or whatever. So
I mean, your hands are fine. You're no George Costanza, but you know.
Yeah, no, I'm not a hand model.
Right.
I have an OnlyFans, but
you could have been if it wasn't for that horrible hangnail back in '93.
Yeah, really scarred me.
I think so. That's all the questions I got. The other thing I was saying is that, again, folks are probably watching this on Dave's Attic. Keep popping in those questions. But for those who don't know, you also have another channel, Dave's Garage. So
it's true. I do.
Yeah, you should check that out too. Encourage folks to look at both.
Yeah, I'm going to assume that anybody that's here has probably seen Dave's Garage. The opposite won't be true. And so I would encourage you, if you have enjoyed this at all, that you share it with somebody else that you know that probably might enjoy it if they sat down and gave it a watch as well. Because YouTube's not going to go massively viral with this type of thing. But if you think it's something that might apply to or might appeal to a particular type of person that you know, please forward a link along to it.
Yeah.
Other than that.
And we're about the questions, right? It's chuck questions in the comments of videos on Dave's Attic, the Shop Talk stuff, Dave's Garage. And that's where we pull them from. You throw a question mark in it, I pull it out, and we take a look at it. So,
yeah, fire them away in the comments. And also episode ideas. Appreciate that all the time as well.
And let us know what you thought of having Dave's brother along for this ride. Although you never heard from him, you never saw him, but he's there.
He nodded and gave me thumbs up a couple times. So.
Excellent.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me here, Glenn and James. And thanks for joining me, everybody in the audience. And I'll see you next time. Thanks. And until then.
This little chair will be waiting for one of you, and a rocking chair for another who likes to rock, and a big armchair for two to curl up in. All next time on Dave's Garage.